You gotta wake up to a world that's real. You gotta rise up and make it feel. Life in full measure is more than just pleasure. Wake up and live.
We are ready to go.
Okay, let's keep this to an hour or less, okay? I mean, I'm very serious. I don't have the time.
No worries. Yeah, so let's just,
Okay.
so we have 5 topics. Give it 10 minutes each and we are good.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Okay, so here we go.
Okay, go ahead.
Hello and welcome. Today is Friday, January the 9th, 2015. This is Paul Sandhu coming to you with another episode of Wake Up and Live Radio. Since this is my first interview of the year, Happy New Year to all listeners. I have on the line with me a repeat and very popular guest, Mr. Jim Willie, the Golden Jackass. Jim Willie is the editor and publisher of the Golden Jackass website, and his news report is titled The Hat Trick Letter. Now, Jim Willie needs no more introduction than that on this program. So without further ado, hello and welcome, Jim.
Oh, good to be back. We have a new year, and sure does look like the breakdown is in full view and gathering momentum precisely as I forecasted a few months ago.
Why,
Everything is breaking. Everything is breaking. Nothing is being spared.
Okay, we would like to have some elaboration on that. So let's begin with the story of the past month, I would say, which is the price of oil. This is a very mysterious story to me, and I really have not been able to make there's so many conflicting reports as to what's going on. Oh, there's demand has suddenly dropped 50%. Like, how the heck that's possible, I don't know. So what's the true story about oil, Jim?
It's a huge question. I agree. It's like there are 4 or 5 major moving parts. Anyone who believes that this is strictly a supply and demand issue with a decline in demand is pretty much, I think, a moron. I don't mince words. That's the public stated governmental Wall Street line of bullshit. There's another Wall Street and governmental line that has come out and become quite popular in the last couple of months or more, and that is the U.S. is engineering a lower oil price in order to damage Russia, which is the world's #1 oil producer. Well, I got news for you. This is just completely wrong information. The ruble has declined in its exchange rate as much as the oil price has. So therefore, in Russia, the oil price has not changed. Let that sink in. The oil price has not changed for the Russian industries. It's equal. The impact to them is on import prices, like for, say, BMWs or any European-built car, a Fiat, machinery from Germany. Okay, those prices have gone up. So Russia is not draining, as the West press says, is not draining their gold reserves in order to support the import price threat to their economy. That's not happening. What they're doing is they're selling treasury bonds. They're dumping their reserve treasury bond toxic paper based in the dollar, which is the exact opposite of what the Western press says. Okay, that's a very important point because the Russians are converting all the foreign toxic toilet paper that they receive for metals and energy sales to the West, converting it to gold, the exact opposite of what the corrupt propaganda in the West is stating. So the Russian economy is not reeling, is not in tatters. Their energy industry is not falling on its face. They have intact revenues in ruble terms. The problem is in their difficult management of the reserves. They're not selling gold, they're selling treasury bonds to manage things. I've got a client who has a son in Moscow. He says there's no price shocks whatsoever. There's no impact to their energy prices like in the United States. And furthermore, he said something that I didn't expect to hear. He said if you look at the import prices, yes, they go up 5 or 10% suddenly in the course of a few weeks, but then they settle right back down. In other words, Russia's not falling apart. Okay, I would like to put forth the opinion, and I feel this very firmly, that the dollar is dying. And it's like a massive uncontrollable rocket. It's just falling up. It doesn't make a lot of sense. There's a lot of paradox involved with the dollar. First of all, one must consider a notion that's very difficult for the novice to understand and more easily comprehended by people with a good deal of experience in the last 10 or 15 years in financial markets. The financial markets are all controlled by derivatives. They're all being intervened by the U.S. Agencies like the Exchange Stabilization Fund and the Department of Treasury, Wall Street and their arbitrage, the Forex derivatives. All the financial markets are controlled by the derivatives. Think of them as massive tow lines. Have you ever seen a ship close to port and the big tugboats? Huge ropes, like 18 inches in diameter ropes. Okay, that's what the derivatives are to the financial markets. They're all breaking. I believe that the derivatives are the main item that the Federal Reserve and major central banks are financing and covering. They're covering the derivatives. They're not covering treasury bonds as much. I believe they're covering derivatives 5 to 10 times in volume. So when you read that they've got $40 billion a month or $80 billion a month in covered treasury bonds by QE and all the bond monetization at the Federal Reserve, my guess is that if you included derivatives, which they never do, the total would be probably between $100 and $400 billion a month. That's right. I'm saying that they're covering something on the order of $2, $3, $4 trillion a year just in derivatives to keep your attention away from certain things. And now your attention is fully on the oil price. We're getting sub $2 gasoline, I believe, or is it sub $3? I don't know. I'm not living in the United States, but we're getting a tremendous drop in the gasoline prices. There's a different argument that I'd like to put forth, and that is, I firmly believe, like with 90% of my gut, China and the Saudis are wrecking the U.S. oil industry by dropping the oil price. And they're doing it with a little bit extra output at a time when demand is actually falling. The Nigerians are, they're desperate too. They're seeing their currency go down about as much as the oil price in dollar terms. So Nigerians are not in trouble on internal revenue. Where these nations are in trouble, but not Russia, is in their foreign debt. With the falling oil price, they're getting, with the rising dollar and their currency declining, what these nations like Nigeria are seeing is an increase in the effective value of their debt. Their debt's in dollars. Imagine you've got a car loan, Dash.
Right.
And you owe $7,000 on it, but then suddenly it's 11 because of currency problems. Went from 7,000 to 11,000. You can't afford the monthly payments anymore because they too go up because they're priced in dollars. So Indian debt, European debt, your Asian debt, Australian debt, African debt, Middle East debt. A lot of it is based in the dollar. And remember, we had 0%, have had 0% in the United States since 2009. So there could be up to something like $9 trillion in just carry trade debt. Add on to that the emerging market debt. It could be that the United States is trying to increase the the dollar value in order to wreck the Asian and emerging market nations because they've got so much dollar-based debt, and they want to interrupt their efforts to create a gold standard through the trade door. This is enormously complex, but here's a piece of evidence that I just got today. In Canada alone, if you look at the number of oil and gas drill rigs, just since the end of November until about now, you got a 64% decline in 5 weeks, from 438 rigs at work down to 156 now. That's a lot more than the oil sands, Dash.
That is huge. That is huge. Yes, and even like I read down in the States as well, a lot of these shale businesses are already going bankrupt and going belly up.
Yes, and there's another major point. As the breakdown occurs, each nation is pretty much on its own. Their central banks are doing what they can to bring about a decline in their own currencies. This is a climax of the competing currency wars. Notice the United States decided in November, well, we want to bring an end to QE and stop the bond monetization because it's wrecking the whole global financial structures, and the world is on to our game. So they eyed the Japanese government pension fund at 1.2 trillion. That sent their currency, the yen, down 10% or more. It's stabilizing now, but I'm on record as saying that I think it's going to cause an East Asian currency war. I'm talking about China, Korea, maybe Taiwan, in addition to Japan. Japan's causing this. So if the United States wants to raid the trillion-dollar pension fund in Japan and force the Japanese to go into infinite, they called it unlimited QE. That's infinite. There's no limit to what they will do. They'll print trillions of dollars to maintain their system. It's the dollar system. They're acting as lackeys for the U.S. central bank. They're under threat of being murdered by the underworld. It's something that's a very deep and dark, ugly secret. The United States maintains threats to Japanese bankers. We will kill them if they change their policy. I think Wall Street ordered the yen carry trade by virtue of saying, bring it down to 0%. We want to borrow that money and invest in treasury bonds. Okay, so sacrifice Japan, and with all that free money, let's invest in U.S. stocks and bonds. Oh my gosh, this is very ugly. But there is a lack of coordination now among the central banks. They're all on their own. They're all defending their own turf. And at the same time, anyone who believes the International Monetary Fund is going to come riding to the rescue with trillions in bailout money is an absolute imbecile, moron, and fool. That includes Jim Rickards, who I believe is a trash-talking, idiot, arrogant ass who talks about the super sovereign IMF basket. No, we're not going to invite into the basket of IMF currencies called the special drawing rights, right, SDR. Thank you. They're not going to bring in the ruble, the yuan, gold, and silver when the U.S. is really busy whacking all of them. It's war. This is war.
So this is a currency war that's raging, full stream ahead right now.
We're seeing climax of the competing currency wars. We're also seeing a climax in the breakdown. It's like watching a Las Vegas 40-story hotel being collapsed with demolition.
Right.
Except we don't see it that way. We see it as the dollar's strong. It's not strong. It's dying. This is what
it's like the Hollywood facade, where they put this cardboard structure up that looks like a building, but behind it is nothing.
Yes. Well, now you've got some actual structures that are falling. They're called economies.
Right.
So as the derivatives are fracturing and being paid out, they're paid out in dollars. So it's like, the Chinese and Saudis continued in stage 2. something that began on its own. If you're a Pakistani or a Brazilian company or a Portuguese company or a French or Dutch or Norwegian company, and you're seeing a lot of problems and you got a bunch of cash, you're going to hunker down into what's rising and what looks strong, and that's the dollar. So the breakdown in the economy feeds the dollar.
So that's why, Jim, that the dollar is rising, is because the derivatives are being paid out in dollars. Otherwise, it makes no sense that it should be rising at this time.
Yes, that's a big part of it, but I also believe that the dollar carry trade. Okay, let me just back up a little bit. Quick preface. Since 2009, we've had 0%, and I'm on record as saying when they started it, it would be forever, and it has been forever. We're in our 5th year of 0%. Oh, call it a 1/4%. I don't care. Round it to 0. If you can borrow dollars for free, you can then invest it in some port facility or railroad in Nigeria or whatever. Whatever you want to do, you can borrow it at 0%. Okay, now if things are starting to fracture economically, it's time to pay off those debts that you used and bought at 0%, but you built something in a business line. You had maybe an investment in some financial strategy. Well, things are unwinding now, and the free borrowed money has been for 5 years the dollar. It's going away, so they're repaying their debts.
Right, okay.
Bringing down their dollar balances by paying back in dollars. Okay, so a sign from many different angles of the global collapse is the rising dollar. I've said for 3 years the dollar's going to rise, then rise some more before it dies. We're seeing it, but Wall Street paints a story of, oh no, we're really hitting Russia under the belt. No, we're not. We're killing our own oil industry. We're going to earn Rockefeller wrath pretty soon, if not already. Now, we're defending the dollar now with war. Well, I think our enemy states are adding to our woes, and they must be really laughing. If they read a press report that the U.S. is arrogantly flexing its muscles for the damage it's doing to Russia with a falling oil price, the Chinese and Saudis must be really laughing hard, because look at the marginal production of oil. 85% of all the new oil production in the United States and the world since 2007 has been from shale, and it's higher cost.
Yes.
So the Saudis and China might be eliminating that marginal output.
Well, that makes sense. Like, this never made sense to me, that if demand is falling, like, why does Saudi Arabia and all the other countries not cut back production? That would be a logical thing to do to maintain the price. But they're all announcing openly, no, we are not going to cut production. So there's something else at work here, and that makes sense that they're trying to destroy the shale oil industry.
That's what I think it is. And, at the same time, Europe is a giant story. We should get to that.
All right, let's move on to Europe now. With Europe, I've come across some stories recently, like the former Prime Minister of Italy. See, these Russian sanctions were meant to hurt Russia. But from what I'm reading, Jim, is that it's actually hurting the Europeans. That, like I said, the former Italian prime minister's, crying the blues. Francois Hollande came out, the president of France, that, we can't keep these Russian sanctions going. Angela Merkel's been making noises. So why and how is it hurting the Europeans more than the Russians? So let's move on to Europe. That's the next big story that I'm seeing playing out right now.
Well, the Russians are really quite nimble. I'd be crazy if I said the Russians aren't hurting a little bit. Obviously, they're disrupted. I don't think they're crippled like anything that we read in the U.S. and Western press. The Russians have found a second source for food. It's called South America. I also believe, I can't prove this at all, I believe that they're using Turkey to access some European food supplies. Turkey Turkey will sell anything. Turkey's an outstanding, historically established intermediary of whatever you need.
Right.
Okay.
It's at the crossroads between Europe and Asia, and they have always facilitated trade, yes.
And they also facilitate trade to the Middle East, to Dubai, a big connection between Turkey and Dubai for gold. Okay, so I'm on record as saying 3 or 4 months ago, the Germans are going to abandon the European Union. And
you have said that on my program many times and other places, Jim, and yes, you did say that very emphatically.
Very emphatically, and now we're seeing the German number 2 politician. I don't honestly, I admit my foibles here and my ignorance occasionally. I believe the second in command in Germany is called the Prime Minister. And I don't know the fellow's name, but he's the second in command behind Merkel. It could be that Merkel is playing to the banker politician crowd while the number 2 man is speaking the real voice of the people. The number 2 man in Germany just came out and said, we need to bring about an end to the Russian sanctions. They make no sense. They're a long-standing, multi-decade trade partner. They're referring to since the end of World War II. I need to repeat this. There are between 3,000 and 5,000 German companies doing business with Russia. They are not going to abandon that. Okay, Merkel has been saying something. She's not talking about an end to the sanctions, but she is on record, I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago, in a visit to Eastern Europe, saying we must continue the South Stream gas pipeline construction. I think she's playing to Hungary and Bulgaria, which are taking bribes right now by the U.S. government in order to obstruct this pipeline. Okay, I believe Austria and Germany are a little bit worried sick that this South Stream pipeline is not going to be completed by end of 2015, early 2016. They need that gas. And Russia played an excellent chessboard move. They said, well, okay, we're not going to do the South Stream. It's not going to go through Hungary and Bulgaria into Austria and Germany. We're not going to do it. We're going to go through Turkey and let those northern nations fend for themselves with supply through Italy or wherever as it comes in from the south where they're not obstructing. So you have all these different countries objecting to the damage to their economy. I like to summarize it more simply. The U.S. is telling the European nations, join us, join the war in Ukraine. Let's block off Russian influence. Let's block off Russian energy. Let's block off Russian trade, and let's block off Russian banks. Join us in the United States as we wreck your economies, as we destroy your labor market, as we wreck your wealth. Join us fascists who are in full face, exposed as fascists in Ukraine. Join us and kill your countries. Join us. War is good. Join us. Poverty is your future. Join us. Join America. And I think Russia has made a brilliant move. A couple of weeks ago, they said, we are going to cut off energy supplies to any nation in Europe that harbors CIA torture prisons. Wow. How can a parliament in France vote against that? Wow. These are major chess moves in progress. And I think we're going to get more and more exposure, I think, to U.S.-based terrorism.
So this French thing that happened yesterday in Paris, is that somehow a byproduct of all this?
I think so. Wasn't it just 2 days before that the French President Hollande announced that he sees futility in the Russian sanctions?
Yes. Okay,
well, how many days passed before an event took place? This implies, if I'm correct, and I'm 95% sure I am correct, this implies that Langley and U.S. security agencies had terrorists cells in place waiting for their orders in France. Now, those who are new to this, you really need to wake up to some history. Since the 1960s, United States security agencies centered in Langley. Langley is not a hedge fund. It's the headquarters of the U.S. Security Agency. Since the 1960 decade, there's been a very nasty, violent movement called Operation Gladio, Gladio. It sponsored terrorism and hid behind elements like the Red Brigade of Italy, the communist organizations. It hid behind them, I should say, maybe allied with them, made alliances with them, and spread bombings and terrorism all across Southern Europe in order to heat up the Cold War. I'm sorry, that's contradiction. In order to heat up the war that became known as the Cold War with the U.S. versus the Soviets. There's always a desire by fascists to have a constant state of war. I believe we're going to start seeing exposure of the U.S. terrorism for foreign policy. BNP Paribas was involved last year in assisting Russian oil deals, and I believe in assisting Chinese gold acquisitions using treasury bonds. So the U.S. attacked BNP Paribas and is trying to get it folded under an entity where the U.S. can control its operations. There's more. The U.S. was involved, I believe, in the hijacking of kidnapping of a Saudi royal. He had in his possession, this happened about 3 or 4 months ago, he had in his possession Russian oil contracts. Then you had the Total Marjorie, the executive.
Right.
And he was killed in a freak airport accident where bullshit.
A snowplow
hit his plane. Right. Okay.
That happened. That's a very frequent occurrence. In Canada, we get a lot of snow, so we hear about planes hitting snowplows all the time.
Yeah, there's one a week, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Or one per lifetime, because I can't remember a single one. We're starting to see more clear linkage between actions of nations against the dollar and terrorist events. I remember like it was yesterday in Oslo, Norway, the middle of 2011, there was a big attack, violent attack in office buildings in Oslo. And when I did some investigation, I found out it was British intelligence that committed it, hired the fellow, and the motive was that the Norwegian pension fund, which is their large sovereign wealth fund based on North Sea oil and gas production, their $600 billion pension fund, they refused to invest in London. They didn't want it involved in the London banking center. Next thing you know, we have an Oslo bombing. Now, I think we're going to start to see more and more linkage. Wait to see in the next couple of months where leaders in Europe say we will not submit to U.S. terrorism just because we don't want these sanctions, just because we want to move away from the dollar. Now, the U.S. is doing something, I think, very clever, very evil, and sinister. They're trying to annex Europe right now using two devices. One's called the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, the TTIP. Look closely at it, and you see a trade union, a trade pact, that's based in corporate power grabs, very onerous patent ownership laws, very onerous means nasty, vile. Very vile legal resolution opportunities, in other words, court procedures. It involves genetic modified food again, and involves internet censorship with almost complete corporate power. Okay, that's one thing that they're trying to jam down the Europeans' throats. I call it annexing Europe. The second thing they're doing is, because of the Ukraine war, they're trying to fold all the member state political helms, the power centers, the presidents and prime ministers. They're trying to get them in Europe to report to the NATO Supreme Commander because they're in a state of war. They're, in a sense, without saying so, trying to impose effectively martial law in Europe and fold the president's offices in member states under the NATO Supreme Commander. I'm hearing one country after another mention some political decision, and they say, well, we had to get approval from the NATO commander before we could do this. Okay, so on a trade basis and on the political basis, the U.S. is trying to annex Europe. And I think they're going to fail. They're going to upchuck this American jammed power move down their throats. It's just not going to work. They're going to come out real soon. I think, I don't know when, but I'm on record as saying by the end of January, and as we get into February, you're going to see breakdowns and a lot of pressures toward movement away from the dollar internationally. And I don't know where the fuse will be lit. I don't know where the crack is going to form. I just know that the timing is going to begin pretty soon. We're starting to see all the major financial markets crack. And they're cracking on the upside while oil is cracking on the downside. This is an amazing situation that's going on. And notice that Europe, you're seeing the Dutch, the Germans, the Austrians, they're demanding their oil. I'm sorry. They're demanding
gold, Jim.
They're demanding their gold back. Okay, why is that? Well, I learned a while ago that the Germans started their repatriation effort back in 2011 because they got advanced warning of the Ukraine war, and they thought the Americans had lost their minds. So they wanted their gold back. Now I'm learning that the Central European nations are trying to form a large hoard of gold, and I believe it is going to be used as the European entry deposit for gold in order to be members of the new BRICS gold and silver backed currency system. The Europeans of Central Europe cannot join the BRICS currency system backed by precious metals without submitting their gold deposit. So they want their gold back. And I like to make a footnote comment. The U.S. and French have held back on giving back the German gold, and it's something like 330 tons. That's not the whole German gold deposit in reserves. They've got over 4,000 tons, like 4,500 tons of gold for German reserves. It's one of the leading nations in the world on per capita gold holdings. We're talking about 1/10 or less of the German gold that they can't get their hands on. They've got 90% of their gold in possession. They're ready.
Oh, they do. I was not aware of that. That's good to know.
Why would anyone think they've only got 300 tons of gold? They've got these trade surpluses for 30 frickin' years.
True.
Okay. The West does not want to let you know that they are reserves or over 4,000 tons. They want you to think gold's irrelevant while we're going and staging wars all across the war, stealing their central bank gold. Within 3 weeks of the Ukraine coup d'etat by the U.S. fascists and Nazis, the U.S. stole the Kiev central bank gold 33 tons. We put out a false story that it's for safekeeping in New York Fed.
Yeah, right.
It's called dumping on the gold market. They bought another couple months while they continue to steal the GLD fund from the morons who think they own gold by investing in GLD. Now, this is we're in the end game here, Dash. This is
So what do you see as far as the future of the EU is concerned now with what's going on with Greece? And I also read the other day that Iceland has withdrawn its application for membership in the EU. They don't want to be a part of that anymore. And, like we remember Victoria Nuland said, F the EU. So it seems like the EU is really getting effed.
This Greek situation could be a real big fuse. I honestly, I don't have it all figured out. But Germany actually said, when I say Germany, this is very confusing. Germany does not speak with one voice. Germany does not think with one head. It's like you've got many camps, but there are two major camps in Germany. One is the politicians and bankers, and the other one is the industrialists and the commerce and the people who work for them. The banking labor force is very small compared to the industrial labor force, like people who work at Siemens or BMW or Mercedes or Audi or Volkswagen. They got 4 major car makers that export across the world. Okay, when I say the Germans made a statement, I mean that it came out of the official pronouncements, meaning politician, banker, and news media. The industrialists do not control their news media. The United States does. When they came out with a statement a week or two ago saying it would be no big deal if Greece leaves the euro, the union. No big deal if, I think they implied no big deal if they defaulted on debt. I took a step back and raised my eyebrows and said, huh? Okay, this could be the good element of Germany making a decision to allow Greece to default with Russia-Chinese blessing, knowing that doing so could bring about a lot of havoc to London and New York banks. In other words, the Germans might let Greece go to cause the chaos for London and, say, Brussels with the European Union Commission and the United States, to cause sufficient chaos to allow Germany to then say, this union is no longer viable.
Right. That would be a good excuse, yes.
This could be the necessary chaos. I don't know. You can't say, well, let me check. I'm going to go look that up. You can't say, let me call Jamie Dimon. And, I've got his ear. He'll let me know what's happening. No, I've got my own sources, and we've got some information. We do some intelligent conjecture. I love the word conjecture because it sounds better than guess.
Right.
We've got some intelligent, critical thinking that you could call conjecture that seems logical, well-founded, ties in with other concepts, and it's starting to look like Greece might be let go. They might be thinking, we can't afford Greece anymore. We took all their gold. We snatched a lot of their prized assets. We don't need them anymore. We've gutted them. Let's just throw their dead bodies that are missing major organs into the woods like they're doing in Ukraine, where I believe the U.S. and a small nation in the southeast corner of the Mediterranean, allied with the United States, I believe is involved in human organ transport, trafficking. There have been over 3,000 cadavers that are missing major organs found in the forests way outside Kiev, Ukraine. Now this
kind of information, Jim, is for most people, is so far beyond their normal, world that they would find very extraordinary perhaps, but this nonetheless is true. Actually, the other day I just watched this movie titled The Whistleblower, and that is about human trafficking by the UN. It was based on a real story in Bosnia. So this has been documented that the United States, and this was all done with the complete blessing of the State Department. So, these kind of things go on. People, need to again wake up and realize that the depth of the evil that pervades the psychopathy of these people is beyond any, what we would term normal human behavior.
Yes, it is. I'd like to mention what Ukraine is well known for. Okay, I don't think you need to convince people of white women trafficking in Eastern Europe. I think they're pretty well tuned into that. They may not believe that the U.S. and the Nazis in Kiev that we've installed are real big participants in that, but I can assure you they are. Okay, here is what Ukraine is historically known for: drug trafficking and banking of the funds. In other words, narco money laundering. Here's something I only learned about a few months ago. The Nigerian fraud that you see online.
Right.
Hi, my name is Prince Makutu, and if you just send me $100,000, I can have you participate in a $5 million profit sharing.
Right.
Okay, I've probably received, I don't know, 30 or 40 of them in the last few years. I used to receive a whole lot more when I had a different internet mail service, but now I don't see much of them. I think they get filtered out. Okay, a lot of the banking for the Nigerian fraud is done in Ukraine banks. Okay, human organ trafficking. This is not minor. We've had some New Jersey hospitals implicated, and we've also had a small allied nation located in the southeast corner of the Mediterranean with close proximity to the U.S. politically. They're all over this. In fact, their hospitals are main beneficiaries of the cheap human organs for transplant purposes.
Yeah, I heard that Israel's become a major medical tourism destination. And I suppose there's a connection there.
Oh, that's the country. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh, is that what you were referring to, Jim?
Hell yes! I make a point not to mention the country's name, not to mention the country's security agency that threatened to kill me.
Okay.
I try not to mention the country's capitals. I try not to mention their banks that are involved.
Anyhow, everybody knows what it is, so let's so go on.
Their banks in Switzerland that took all the Madoff money.
Madoff, that's kind of a funny name, eh? He made off.
I know.
with a few $1 billion. Okay.
Yeah.
But okay, so shall we move on to?
Sure.
So what do you foresee for Europe then? This split from the U.S. is very much in the works right now. It's ongoing, and you think that it's going to accelerate in 2015. Is that your conclusion?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Now, what about the U.S. itself? Now, they have been working very hard to try and isolate Russia, but from what I have been reading and seeing happening is that it is the U.S., on the contrary, that is actually becoming isolated as superpowers like economic and military superpowers like China are now, coming on the scene in a much bigger way than we've ever seen before.
The actions in Libya, Egypt, Syria, Ukraine, Venezuela, all these actions are seen as hostility by the U.S. and I believe support the notion that the U.S. is relying on war, subterfuge, theft, and genocide to support the dollar. And as a result, the whole world is starting to isolate the United States. I've heard it now said for 2 or 3 straight years. This comes from The Voice. He's got a lot of European contacts. He said European executives don't return American phone calls anymore. They don't want to do business with them. They're turning east.
And isn't that something, what was that the FATCA thing or something like that, that's also put a kibosh on a lot of companies that just or banks, they don't even want to look at U.S. money anymore.
The whole world, from a financial standpoint, has been concluding now for the last 2 or 3 years. Doing business with the United States is very cumbersome. It's costly. We have all these compliance rules. FATCA is just one of them. That's for foreign bank accounts disclosure. for U.S. citizens. It's far more than that. It's like, well, you have to submit these forms and demonstrate that there's been some kind of assurance that the companies that these foreign companies are doing business with are not involved in terrorism. I mean, I don't think they can even define terrorism. It's a perfect word out there. Oh, he's a terrorist. What does that mean? Well, I have a simple definition of what terrorist is. Any nation or financial entity that does not want to do business in the dollar. That was the basis of the Iranian sanctions.
And the Iraq War.
And the Iraq War.
And Libya.
Libya, too. They wanted to come out with a pan-Arab gold dinar. I mean, it's far more than that. The Cyprus events, I believe, had a dollar basis. The Russians were using Cyprus banks where they had the huge Gazprom bank and other ones, other big Russian banks in there, Sberbank, and there's a three-letter one. I can't. It's got a V and a G, and I can't think of the name. But the Russians were using Cyprus to dump treasuries and buy gold. So U.S. came out with a story that, we're going to default on Cyprus banks and do a bail-in. Wouldn't it be a whole lot different if they announced more accurately, we don't like what the Russians are doing in Cyprus, buying gold and dumping treasury bonds, so we're going to try to block them? That kind of story wouldn't go over real well. So notice we've had no bail-ins in, I think it's 20 months since Cyprus.
Right.
But we do have the G20 in Brisbane, Australia, just 2 months ago, announcing they're going to institutionalize bail-ins. Well, I kind of doubt it'll ever happen. And if it does happen, if bail-ins do happen, I will go on record as saying it will be coincident with the failure of numerous giant banks and their liquidation.
Just as an aside, Jim, I have family in Brisbane, and just after the G20, Brisbane was hit by the biggest storm they have pretty much ever been hit by. So I was just wondering if that was, this is just my conspiratorial mind working, if their message was being sent to them about these proposed bail-ins and all that they spoke about at that meeting.
Well, it could be. You could look at Fukushima. You could look at the hurricanes in Philippines, the back-to-back ones within a month. You could look at a lot of different weather events that are closely tied to decisions by the countries to move away from the dollar. We're talking about HAARP events, HAARP. I don't want to open this big can.
Right. Okay, so now what are some of the signs that you are seeing that the U.S. dollar is being, bypassed and is becoming increasingly irrelevant on a global scale? So what are some of the major signs that have come to your notice?
I think it's a really important thing to look at the devices and the structures. You could call them windows, you can call them offices. Look at all these RMB facilities. Now, there are two types of, RMB means renminbi, Chinese yuan, has a nickname of renminbi. In Chinese, it means people's money. But now you're seeing the usage of the acronym RMB. I'm looking to get an RMB account here in Costa Rica. Well, I think that'd be pretty cool. Get away from the dollar, store money in Chinese currency, because it's going to go up when the dollar vanishes. Okay, there are two types of RMB centers. One is a hub that is used for, say, conversion to any of 30 different currencies, okay? And another one is a bond trading center where you got bond issuance, where even companies like McDonald's could float a corporate bond in RMB currency denomination. All right, so you've got all these different RMB centers coming up. The major hubs. A hub is much bigger than a swap facility. A hub is a center for converting currency and a place where they can buy and sell and issue corporate bonds in RMB. London and Frankfurt, Germany are the two, and I think Frankfurt is going to supersede, eclipse, and overwhelm Britain. Huge, huge R&B center is developing in Germany. All right, now you get the swap facilities. It used to be, you know, Brazil and a couple other nations several years ago. Well, now it's more like what nations are not participating in the swap facility for trade. Okay, let's just run off a list of countries. This is not complete, but you got a lot of Eastern European nations that are part of old Soviet Union, like Belarus and Kazakhstan. They're part of the yuan swap facility family. But so's France, so's Switzerland, so's England, so's Germany, Australia, New Zealand, Brazil, Canada. Canada's the most recent one. Now you've got a hint that Los Angeles is going to open one. I thought, no way in hell will the United States ever open an RMB swap facility, but there is now in Los Angeles an RMB trading center. I think it's an office to facilitate conversion because there's so much import of Chinese goods in the United States, and furthermore, the Chinese own the Long Beach, California, which is Los Angeles Metro. Chinese own that port facility, so they want to facilitate the trade. What is a swap facility? Okay, it's like 3 Chinese giant banks and 5 Brazil banks all make this handshake that the Chinese-Brazilian trade will be settled outside the dollar, and on a net basis, they'll figure things out at the end. It might be some credit carried over to the next quarter. I don't know. It might be some bigger deal that settles in the deficit or the balance, you know, balance due, credit for one nation. It's going to be largely Chinese supplying and Brazil buying. The Australians now have $0 trade with China. Okay.
Did you say zero?
Yes. Yes, 0.
That would have seemed unbelievable even 5 years ago.
The Chinese own all the ports. They own many different mining properties in Australia.
And they own half the real estate in Sydney now. I was there, and it's just the Chinese investment is incredible.
Wow, I didn't know 50%.
Well, I mean, that's just my
Okay.
I may not be, that may be an exaggeration, but it's huge. It's huge, their investment on the Gold Coast in Sydney and in their major cities in Melbourne. Yeah, it's huge.
If it's not 50%, maybe it's only 46. You know,
right.
I have clients in Australia and New Zealand who report to me the Chinese influence in driving up property prices. And a couple people have reported, well, my friend so-and-so sold out 6 months ago, got 30% more than they expected on their home, and now they cannot qualify for a bank loan to buy in their own city.
Oh, this happened in Toronto here, Vancouver, in Canada. Yeah, locals are sold out and they can't buy back anymore because the prices have just doubled and more in the past 10 years.
And Vancouver, British Columbia, there's a similar effect, but I don't think the property prices have risen as much, but I could be wrong. Maybe they've risen substantially. Okay.
They have risen huge. They're like a crappy home in Vancouver, a detached home on a 30-foot lot will be over $1 million now.
Well, it's mind-boggling. Okay, so you have these swap facilities for bilateral trade with China. If you have enough nations that create a critical mass, then you've got pretty much all Chinese trade outside the dollar with a significant portion of the world's trading centers. This is how the dollar is marginalized. Now, here's where it gets the final blow. Okay, I'm going to rattle off a list of the major offices. There's the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the AIIB. It's going to be used, and it's being funded already, it's going to be used for lots and lots of Asian infrastructure projects, like port facilities, LNG facilities for liquefied natural gas, bridge construction, railroad construction. They're pretty much linking all Southeast Asia. Just think Myanmar, former Cambodia, Thailand, all these little nations, Vietnam, They're all getting linked up with China using this kind of fund. Then there's also the New Development Bank, the NDB. This has been also called the BRICS Development Fund. So it is going to be used for Tanzanian Railroad, for Nigerian Railroad, for port facilities in Western Africa. But it's also going to be used, so I'm told, from our conjecture and our hints in my own little private staff. I don't know what we call ourselves. It's kind of like a staff and function, but not informality. They don't get a paycheck. We work together, the 10 of us. Really smart guys, and I would like to say this on record. Without them, the newsletter would be one notch lower, maybe two in quality. All right. We believe that the BRICS Development Fund, now called the New Development Bank, we believe it's going to become their gold central bank depository. We believe that the $200 billion committed to this new development bank is too much to invest in ports and energy projects and mining ventures and railroads. It's too much. We believe half of it is going to source their central bank with gold. Okay, then they've got what they call the Contingency Reserve Arrangement, the CRA. It's for crisis management. They don't want another major meltdown like in Thailand, the 1995, what do you call it, the Asian meltdown? They don't want another one. So if there's a run on their currency, if they have some debt problems, if they have financial market problems, if they have sovereign bond problems, they want $100 billion, maybe 200, to be at the ready for short-term loans to fix the problems. Because once you fix a problem from a confidence standpoint, you fix the problem perhaps permanently. You stop the whole concept of a run on the Thailand system that affected Japan and South Korea. If you interrupt that early, there might not be a run at all. There might not be any impact to Japan and other nations like Korea.
So like what Soros did in the 90s and all that, so they will preempt all that and they will stop these Western sharks from eating the flesh off all these weaker currencies, weaker nations around in Asia and Africa and elsewhere.
Yes, even Argentina. I believe the crises in Argentina in the 80s and 90s in Mexico resulted in Wall Street draining their banks. I mean, this is how the West exploits emerging markets.
So Argentina has been saved now, hasn't it? Like the Argentine problem could have been way bigger if it were not for China coming in and helping them out in these past few months.
Yes, but the aid is kind of small. Let's see if it grows. I think that Argentina is going to be a test case for the BRICS nations to revive and resuscitate in full American hemisphere view. There's another fund, not done. The Silk Road Fund was just signed up by China and funded with $40 billion to improve connectivity between Asia and other parts of the world, primarily, I believe, Europe and the Middle East. This Eurasian trade zone is not Europe and Asia only. It's the Middle East. It's the Muslim centers. It's the Arab centers. They're going to be joined.
So it's going to go through the Central Asian republics all the way into Europe.
Yes, but also all the way down into the Persian Gulf.
Okay.
Dubai.
Right. So it'll be like an octopus with, many branches, many tentacles spread all through Asia and Europe.
It's the George Orwell Eurasian concept to oppose Oceania by the British and Americans.
Interesting.
This is how things are shaping up. It's the Americans and the Anglo-American, British American. The Anglo-Americans joining up with all the navies of the world to oppose the gigantic Europe, Asian, Arab centers for trade.
Right.
Now, I do not believe the BRICS are going to be folded under IMF control. I think the BRICS are going to stand on the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the BRICS Development Bank, the Contingency Reserve Arrangement, and the Silk Road Fund, and say F you to the IMF and the World Bank as they either become totally under Chinese control or are disbanded and tossed into the dustbin of history. In other words, since the United States offered the Ukraine war a year ago and violated a pact, a treaty, if you will, with 140 nations for a global currency reset. It's not in the U.S. news, not in the Canadian news. Let me repeat that. The U.S. signed with 140 nations a global currency reset accord that would have adjusted certain currencies but would have doubled the gold price. Doubled the gold price. It would have doubled the gold price and tripled the silver price. It would have tripled the silver price.
Right.
The United States decided to betray the nations and the accord, to violate it, and offer a Ukraine war instead and to steal their central bank gold. So the U.S. has basically shut the door on the gold standard coming through the Forex currency doors. Instead, the gold standard is going to be installed through the trade settlement systems, rendering the dollar useless for settling trade, making the U.S. desperate for imports, and launching a new currency which will have to devalue. And as a result, all the banking systems of the world are going to realize these treasury bonds are trash. They're toxic paper, messing up our cost structure. We're going to have to dispose of them, and that's going to bring about the end of the dollar. As the world discards the dollar for trade settlement, since the U.S. with the Ukraine war made it clear that the Forex doors will not be walked through for reinstalling the gold standard. In other words, the trade systems will get rid of the dollar, forcing all the banking structures to diversify and discard their toxic treasury bonds.
Now, Jim, this would not be speculation. This is actually something which is going on in full force with all these bilateral agreements that have been multilateral agreements that have been signed around the world to bypass the dollar. So this is something that is already happening. They're doing it in their own currencies, but it's only a matter of time before gold becomes a component. It already may be in a stealth manner.
Yes, if you've ever watched a few spiders making a web, they go from one point to another, like China to Australia. And then they go from China to France. And then they go from China to London. And then China to Brazil. Moscow, right. After a while, step back and you see a web.
Right. So that web is quite advanced now. I would think that it's not in its early stages. It's at least in the intermediary stages already, I would guess.
I think it's in the late stages. You've got 170 nations that have signed up as BRICS alliance nations. So when the United States tries to isolate Russia and continue with its trade war with China, which I forecast back in 2005 and 2006, I said it would move from a cooperative alliance to a hostile alliance to a friction-filled alliance to outright trade war. Okay, so as the U.S. tries to isolate Russia while it tries to wall off China, and that's not possible because they're a major creditor to the United States, they're not going to isolate Russia and China. They're going to isolate themselves from the BRICS and their alliance nations. The U.S. is going to alienate itself and isolate itself from 170 major nations in the world. In other words, the United States is going to isolate itself. It's been a major theme of mine for 2 years. The United States is in the process of isolating itself with policies and measures that began in open recognition in 2012. The gold standard is going to arrive through the BRICS and their alliance nations in order to stop this chronic, endless global financial crisis, where the West has no initiative, no effort, and no desire toward solution.
Right, right. Okay, so now, are you then in these all these events that have been going on for the stage for which was set after that 07, 08 debacles? Do you see an acceleration in the global economic degradation and decline and decay as a breakdown is occurring, which is being led by, of course, the move away from the U.S. dollar?
Yes.
And this endless QE?
Yes, I see. As 2015 began, we're here. The global breakdown is more clear. The ruined sovereign bonds, they're ruined because they're just being reinforced by hypermonetary inflation. You can't support the Portuguese debt with the printing press that's being used by Draghi's European Central Bank. You don't have any legitimacy. You don't have any confidence. It's not valid. It's just effective in a way that's gradually losing its legs. So you have all these nations that are breaking down, and now you have the tangible economies breaking down on the retail side and on their oil industries. This damage to the oil sector is not minor. You have $2 trillion in marginal subprime oil industry bonds. In other words,
did you say 2 trillion?
2 trillion.
Isn't that bigger than the mortgage bonds?
That's my next point. Yes. This is an order of magnitude larger than the mortgage subprime problem that blew up and caused Lehman Brothers, or actually would have caused the death and destruction and failure of Goldman Sachs if they had not sabotaged Lehman Brothers. So what's coming in the next few months is a sequence of oil industry subprime bonds that are either broken and fail in full view or are covered by the Federal Reserve, and I don't think they're going to be doing that. So 2015 is for open recognition of tangible economy destruction, not financial economy destruction. The financial center destruction has been very obvious since Lehman Brothers in 09, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. All these years we've had insolvent banks propped up by easy money, QE money, toxic bond redemption, all these patches out of the Euro Central Bank, all these. So 2015 is also going to see, I think, a worldwide call to put an end to the dollar. To stop.
You mean like, okay, when you say a call, Jim, like is that going to be like something that is going to be openly announced? Because I mean, behind the scenes, this has already been happening. So you anticipate that this is going to be an open call for this coming from some of the major centers of the world?
Well, it's happening already in Russia for several months. China.
Yes, the Russians have been very loud about it. I have read that. Yes.
But so have Chinese. They're echoing the Russian call. And now the BRICS are speaking more loudly. You know, take a look at the G20 meetings. The last 4, 5, 6, 7 of them. The most important announcements have come from the BRICS conference that happened at the same time. The G20 is morphing into a BRICS conference, slowly.
So the G7 is basically becoming irrelevant then?
Exactly. 2015 is going to be the year where the BRICS alliance comes to center stage and makes open calls that are joined by Western major allied nations for the end of the dollar. They're going to say the gold standard is the solution. We've been avoiding it all this time. Now is its time because we don't want our economies all to fail simultaneously. I believe this is part of the New World Order crap collapse the economies, bring about a totalitarian global state. I heard it said that some of the good forces that want to oppose the dollar, oppose the Anglo-American fascists, they want to collapse the banking system and economies in order to kill off, in a formal sense, the Anglo-American global banker cabal. But I don't think that's correct. I think a collapse of the economies and financial structures and banks would make it easy for them to declare martial law and put in these emperors, these regional emperors that will not honor national boundaries and will bring about new laws where people will be executed if they don't comply. And, could be other strange things like a forced, one world religion. I don't know. But 2015 is the year. This is the year that I'm not going to go on record saying this is the year the dollar dies. No. This is the year the dollar suffers some very severe, if not fatal, heart attacks and very severe, if not fatal, cracks in the tangible system.
So how will that, this is a question that one of my American listeners had sent me to ask you, is how will that affect people that are living in the U.S.?
Their national leaders are going to explain to them the urgent need to come up with a domestic currency. I call it a republic dollar. It's being called a treasury note dollar. I also like to call it the shit dollar, because if the U.S. loses the global reserve U.S. dollar as it's known now, the Federal Reserve note dollar, if the U.S. loses this exorbitant privilege, as the former French President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing called it, if the U.S. loses this exorbitant privilege, it's going to have to pay for its imports. It's going to have
with real money.
Well, you could say with real money, but I'm going to start off by saying with some other currency.
Right.
And this transitional currency, I think, is going to be the devalued new dollar, the shit dollar, the shice dollar, the republic dollar. If they start a new dollar, they're going to have to say, this is what its foundation is. This is what its backing is. And they're going to be stuck by saying, we've got gold behind it. And further examination is going to be the fraudulent U.S. government accounting with deep storage gold that's tied with the evergreen contracts of Barrick. So I think it's going to be devaluated 30% out of the gate. And in 6 months, another 30%, which would be an effective 70% devaluation of the dollar that the Americans will need to use in order to bring about their import supply. When global trade stops in the dollar, the banks of the world are going to stop taking treasury bonds as they begin dumping the treasury bonds, and the United States will be forced to come up with a new currency in order to secure import supply. They're going to have big troubles, so the Americans are going to experience massive shortages while they increase on prices all over the place. And then comes the chaos, then comes the disorder, then comes the rioting and the martial law. And I think we've already seen a U.S. government debt default. I think it's already occurred. They suspended the debt limit, which is consistent with my claim of a debt default already in occurrence. The Federal Reserve now reportedly has Chinese controlling interest of its cabal. And the Chinese have taken ownership of J.P. Morgan's headquarters, which includes a gold vault, the largest private non-central bank gold vault in the world, which has underground tunnels into the Federal Reserve gold vaults. So I believe the U.S. has already defaulted, and the Chinese have told the Americans, don't announce it, because we're still busy converting our treasury bonds into hard assets like port facilities, mining deposits, energy projects, petrochemical included, and commercial office buildings. The Chinese are doing something very clever. They're putting billions on deposit at Wells Fargo and borrowing 5 to 7 times as much from that collateral to buy U.S. commercial buildings. And the U.S. banking authorities, like the Department of Treasuries and the rule makers, they cannot say to Wells Fargo, you can't use Treasury bonds as collateral. I mean, this is, the Chinese are using the U.S. system in order to, I think, bring about a commercial colonization. They're buying up.
So the enemy's already within the gates.
They've been in the gates for years. They've got about 7 industrial parks. It's not just Idaho anymore. It's upstate New York. They bought when I was growing up in Pittsburgh, it was a daily occurrence to clean out your pores on your face. Go to the mirror, clean out some of the black. That's from the steel mills. Yeah. Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh changed radically when the steel industry went away. Cleveland included, Philadelphia and New Jersey included. The steel industry went away. But in the Pittsburgh metro area, there were some Westinghouse mills. I actually worked for Westinghouse during my graduate school summers. I had a nice, I wouldn't call it a cushy job. I'd call it a special job. I was selected. Westinghouse went to the Carnegie Mellon Statistics Department and said, we'd like one of your good students to work with us all summer. And they chose me, and I was very flattered, and I made some decent money. It was good. It was, hourly wage, and I worked 3 or 4 days a week. I had a mentor, a guy who, shepherded me along. And the Chinese just bought the Westinghouse mills, the abandoned mills. Westinghouse invented the train air brake system. Westinghouse makes hundreds of thousands of transformers, the things you see on top of the telephone poles that connect the wires.
Right.
Those are transformers. They're largely a Westinghouse monopoly, not entirely. All right. So the Chinese are already inside the gate. They're already buying up properties, and I think they're going to become the biggest American business employer in 3 years.
Not just American, by the way. Like, there's a summit going on in Beijing right now for Latin America and the Caribbean countries. It's the first time ever that they have gone out to have a summit out in Beijing. So this is America's backyard, which, the Caribbean and Latin America used to be the U.S. playground. Nobody else was allowed here except for the Russians as some influence. But now it's China all the way from Mexico down to Argentina.
Absolutely. And there have been trade deals like between Brazil and Uruguay. They're going to do all their trade and settle it outside the dollar. And it's being talked about as a model for Mercosur. Think of it as Mercado del Sur, the southern market.
Right.
Mercosur is not going to be dollar-based in trade settlement. It's going to be for all Latin America, maybe all South America, and they'll work their way up into Central America because Russia is all over Nicaragua. China's got the canal deal, which I am very dubious about its completion in Nicaragua. The Chinese operate the Panama Canal. They have huge presence there in the import-export business. The Russians and Chinese are slowly encircling the United States.
Isn't that interesting that the U.S. has been, for years trying to circle Russia through NATO and Afghanistan, going into Afghanistan and such, and meanwhile, without anybody noticing, China and Russia are at their own borders, both north and south.
Yeah, this is game over.
Okay, Jim, before we go, I know you're on a little bit past your scheduled time. One last question, which we didn't bring up here, but maybe in passing, which is petrodollar. Is it dead?
It's been dead for over a year.
And do you think Saudi Arabia is playing the game it is with this overproduction, etc.? It is to break free from the shackles of the petrodollar?
I think it's evidence that the petrodollar was broken away from it.
Okay.
I think the systems now are all broken behind the scenes for linking the dollar to crude oil. This is paradoxical. As the systems and the cables break, the dollar is free to rise because many of the derivatives are priced in dollars. They're created by the Anglo-Americans. When they break, they're dissolved. They're paid out in dollars, which brings about this queer, bizarre dollar demand. I think the petrodollar died over a year ago when you saw the Brent crude oil price converge to the West Texas price. That was your hint that the petrodollar was dead, defunct, and no longer functioning.
I think that has to be the story of the century so far, this death of the petrodollar, or this decade anyways. So let's see. I think it's going to materialize rather quickly now. The next stage where countries are openly going to start buying oil and trading oil once their contracts expire in non-dollar terms. I think it's already happening, but it's going to gather pace, and I think 2015 will be certainly instrumental in bringing all that about. Well, Jim, I know you are pressed for time, so before you go, can you please go ahead and share your website and your contact information and tell our listeners about your newsletter that they can subscribe to?
Sure. I won't go into any long description, but www.goldenjackass.com is the website. There's a lot of free material in there. There's far more radio interviews and links for people to tap into them than there are public articles. I wrote a public article this week, for instance, and I hadn't written another one since early November. I used to write about 45 a year. It was almost one a week, but now it's every 2, 3, 4 weeks. But you know, I had some personal things happen in my life. They weren't bad, just disruptive. I had to deal with some things, therefore I didn't write a public article 3 weeks ago in early December. And then Christmas came, and you know, a lot of things happen in Christmas, and distractions and shopping and seeing some friends. And so there are many more radio interviews on the goldenjackass.com website, but there are some public articles that are worth reading, I think. If people are new to this, you know, come up to some speed, get some speed, and, you know, become more familiar, because the dollar is going to go away and change American life, turning it on its head. After you get some speed, or even if you want to go straight into it, be my guest. I have a lot of novice-type readers who are learning quickly. Sign up for the Hat Trick Letter. It has 2 parts. It had its 10th anniversary in May. It has 2 parts. Each is a monthly publication. It's the Global Money War Report. That's for high level. And it's the Golden Currency Report for ground level. The high level talks about, you know, dismissal of the dollar, BRICS developments, sanctions, and just the whole dollar isolation and removal issues. But the ground level Golden Currency Report has a lot of interesting things about demand for coins, Indian rules and regs that are changing, making it favorable for imports. Has to do with the Shanghai markets and some of the contracts there that are actually trading in gold. For instance, the COMEX has not settled any gold contracts for futures contracts since June of 2012. That's 2.5 years. So the COMEX is not a gold market. It's a gold paper corruption market. It's all settled in cash. Look it up. I'm not making this up. You don't have to. There's too much bizarre stuff happening. But we're going to see some resolution and movement toward remedy in 2015. It'll be a very disruptive year. I was on record in early 2014 when Kiev was taken over and all the U.S. hired assassins were put on the rooftops. Before the Kiev coup took place, I was on record saying it's going to be a very tumultuous year. It's going to pick up a lot of speed in its chaos, and it will end much, much differently from the seemingly tranquil QE is wonderful early parts of 2014. Now, QE is really not front and center. It did not, the 2014 year did not end with QE front and center. It ended with sanctions, dollar rise, global isolation efforts, war, and more war. Does anyone deny now that the dollar is defended by war? That's the point.
Not me. I never denied that.
I was called crazy in 2005. Now people say, well, obviously.
The truth becomes apparent, like what that's as a quote from Orwell, something to that effect, that or one of that in time, everybody comes to accept it as as if they've known it all along.
Right.
Anyhow, that's good, Jim. Yes, your hat trick letter is indeed a wealth of information. Sometimes it's far better reading. Not sometimes, it is far better reading than Time magazine or something. It usually even runs to sometimes to that length. So I can vouch for that. So once again, my friend, it's been, we've had a treasure trove of information that you've shared with us, for which I'm grateful. And we'll be speaking to you again very shortly, I'm sure. And in each passing week and each passing month, there's going to be, I think, bigger events happening this year than there were last year.
Yes, it's going to be a dangerous year.
On that note,
people need to protect themselves. They need
okay, well, then quickly, one more question then. When you say protect themselves, is gold and silver still one of the, safest forms of protecting your wealth?
I think that and farmland and critical industrial property. I don't know of any other ways to protect yourself. You need to get out of your mutual funds, IRAs, stock accounts, bank CDs. What's going to happen to a bank CD, Dash, if the bank goes under from the collapse of the dollar?
Well, you could keep the certificate and use it for fire, for burning one day if you're getting cold.
That's very true. I would prefer converting them, paying any necessary taxes, and buying gold and silver coins and bars. That's what I would prefer. Call me old-fashioned. Why is it that for several thousand years gold and silver were considered money, but only in 1971 the Americans don't even understand what money is? Why is that? Okay, this is what we discuss in the hat trick letter. And for those who are really confused, let me leave you with a tough question. What is the difference between legal tender, money, and the dollar? Sign up for my newsletter and learn.
All right, Jim. Thank you, my friend. Thank you for coming on, and you have yourself a great day down there.
As you're passing by, a teller tells you what you need. Don't go by if your life is a pocket full of greed. It won't let you in. Should I take an umbrella? I hear it doesn't rain, except on those leaving here abrupt with money pain. 'Cause they don't got it. Love, love, rich boy, proud as I could be. Burning window was a place in twilight fantasy. Now to know that I've been there, it's quite a different world. But I don't think I'll leave you in. Well, it's best you find yourself. I pray you find it. Love, love, love. Love, love, love. Through the money window, living life is free. Once you're through the window, it's me.